Alcohol, which will cause 1 in 20 deaths just this year, cannabis is pretty mild.
Let's think about that number real quick. That means out of the 3 million deaths from last year, over 150,000 of them were due to alcohol-related things. But regardless, I'm your host, Two-Face, and today I want to watch this video about weed, because why the fuck not? It's called We Need to Talk About Weed. It's by this channel. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I don't want to butcher it. But yeah, I think it's going to be a great video to watch. I feel that weed is glorified too much and needs to be looked at equally, the bad and the good, and that's what this video is about, so I think we'll have an interesting time.
Cannabis has been vilified to a ridiculous degree for the last century, but it's now finally being decriminalized in more and more places around the world. It's just recently been legalized in Germany, and for very good reasons. Compared to legal drugs like alcohol, which will cause 1 in 20 deaths just this year, cannabis is pretty mild. So, to justify harsh prosecution and punishment, its negative effects have been wildly overstated. Naturally, there was a lot of pushback, and here's something went wrong. If you followed the discourse over the last few years, you might have got the impression that weed has almost only upsides and few, if any, negative side effects. We ourselves contributed to that narrative. What made this worse is that criminalization made it very hard for scientists to study cannabis, especially its long-term effects. They faced bureaucratic and legal hurdles, and studies often had to rely on small sample sizes. In the last few years, this finally started to change, so it's time to bring new evidence to the discussion.
I'm a big believer in if you're going to do something, you should do the research first, and you should definitely know what you're getting yourself involved with. And with this increase of information and studies, I feel it's just getting easier to start this habit that might not be the best for the world.
And, well, it's not pretty. While weed is still much less harmful than alcohol, it does have a dark side. It is more addictive than we thought and can have significant negative effects if you use it long term. It seems that... what are you doing? Before you tell us how dumb we are, please watch the video. To be crystal clear, we think prohibition doesn't work and cannabis should be legal, but this also means that we need to treat it as what it is, a drug, with unique upsides and downsides.
I'd like to also make it super clear. I do not think these guys are stupid in any way. And I fully believe, or not believe, I fully agree with their statements. Weed is a drug, and some people, myself included, use it too often for it to be a drug. Like alcohol. Alcohol is a drug, but people use it to party.
So let's take an honest look at some of the latest research together. Weed is getting stronger and stronger. Cannabis's magic juice is tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. It docks on your cannabinoid receptors, which affects various brain functions. THC activates some regions and calms down others, creating a fun cocktail of sensations. The more THC, the more intense the high. And people seem to be into higher highs, or at least this is what the market is providing. In the US, Canada, and in Europe, the concentration of THC in legal and illegal cannabis products has more than doubled in the last few decades. While ever more potent strains are bred, products like edibles or concentrates with more than 60% THC have become increasingly common, while the share of products with less than 15% THC has declined. Unfortunately, just about every problem weed creates gets worse at higher THC doses. At the same time, more and more people use weed. In the US, more people consumed cannabis daily than alcohol for the first time in 2022. In Canada, 26% of people 16 and older use it, up from 22% in 2018. It's not possible to say if legalization is the reason for this though, since studies are pretty inconsistent and vary massively between different users. In some, consumption went up, in others it stayed stable, and the trend to use more weed began in the early 90s and sped up in the 2000s, way earlier than legalization. So today, more people consume more weed than ever before in the last century, and it's the strongest it's ever been. What are we seeing as a result of this?
I mean, yeah, I was just about to say something like this all sounds pretty positive. It's getting more potent, it's being greater. Sure, there's some little side effects here and there, but it's all sounding good right now.
Let's start with something that used to get you laughed out of the room: addiction. Weed addiction and withdrawal symptoms.
So I don't know when the switch was, or if there even was a switch. At least the people around me have switched. But back when I started to smoke, I had a friend who would constantly tell me that weed's not addictive. But then as soon as they were out of weed, they'd sit there and jones and freak out for the next couple of days. And it's so weird. It's such a weird concept to go through the symptoms of withdrawal every couple of days and not realize that you're addicted to something. Like, I know that I have a small problem, but I know I can stop. I have stopped. I have to stop. I'm not financially stable enough to keep going.
A big narrative about weed is that it's not addictive, or at least not that big of a deal. And for most people, this is true. Studies clearly show that the majority handle it well. For 8 out of 10 using weed, it's just a casual high and not problematic at all. About 2 in 10 users develop a cannabis use disorder, or CUD. CUD has 11 different...
See, I think this part of the study is a little altered. Just a little, because I don't think people are addicted to weed like they are cigarettes. Like cigarettes, you need one every 4 hours or you cannot function. I feel like weed's more of an addiction that when you run out, people freak out and panic because they don't have that possibility of escape. I also feel that that happens a lot more than just 2 out of every 10 people. I feel like that's I feel like everyone I know at least gets a little panicked when they run out, or they get they're a little less when they're out.
Cannabis use disorder, or CUD. CUD has 11 different symptoms, from the inability to stop when you've had enough, to using it when you know it will have negative consequences, to tolerance and withdrawal. They can all basically be reduced to, you're doing it too often, even if it's bad for you, and it's less fun than it could be. There are 3 major risk factors here: the amount of THC, how often you consume, and your age when you start using cannabis. The more THC, the more often, and the younger you are when you start, the higher your risk. If you smoke too much weed too often, it will have negative impacts on your life. So if this is you, toning it down a bit will make a big difference.
No, yeah, for sure. Any tweakers or anybody I know chronically addicted to this crap that can't get off of their carts or their weed, or they're just super addicted to it, started it when they were younger. They've been doing it for 5-6 years. They've been doing it constant. They've been doing it more and more to keep it up because their tolerance is too high. I mean, you should definitely at least wait till you're an adult. I know nobody wants to hear that, but you should wait till you're an adult to start smoking. At least, maybe even 21. Legally, you should wait till 21, but once you're an adult, you're making your own decisions.
1 in 10 users develops a serious addiction. They usually consume daily, and their life is significantly impaired or held back because they spend a lot of their time either using or recovering from cannabis use. Since their brain is building a tolerance, they need increasingly high doses or stronger weed, often both. Studies found a variety of negative effects. Heavy users can experience bad moods, feel irritable, restless, paranoid, anxious, and even depressive. In a sad twist of irony, for many addicts it feels like they need weed to fight these symptoms. Maybe it did actually help at first, while in reality it makes those symptoms stronger and more persistent. Studies also found that loneliness and frequent cannabis use go hand in hand. If you feel lonely, you're more likely to use weed, and if you use weed, you may experience more loneliness. It's not always easy to say which came first, but they seem to reinforce each other. So, on the one hand, cannabis makes loneliness feel much less bad. On the other hand, it can also make you feel more socially awkward than you actually are and withdraw from friends. This can lead to a downward spiral that ends in self-isolation and chronic loneliness.
Now, this part I actually find pretty relatable. When I first started smoking, this is what happened because I was stuck inside because I broke my ankle and couldn't leave the house. So it was just doing it because I was by myself. And then at that point, it was just what I did, whatever. And I've gotten out of that since then. And it's now like a social thing that I do with friends or something I do for YouTube. But it's definitely something you have to avoid and you have to watch out for when or if you start smoking.
Another thing many people who consume a lot experience is a mental numbness that makes boredom feel okay because it impacts the reward system of your brain. Not great, but good enough. You can spend your days killing time binging mildly interesting stuff, being numb rather than having fun. Boredom is a signal to your mind to get creative or learn something new, but this is suppressed. This also makes quitting so much harder because your daily routines suddenly seem boring and unexciting, making it very tempting to go back. If you find yourself using constantly, this can also stunt your development as a person.
The mind numbing is a real thing that people have to watch out for. The ability to just scroll on TikTok or something for hours endlessly, even though you're bored out of your mind just because your mind can tolerate it. That is something else I had to deal with like last year when I started. But I've outgrown that. I've gotten past that, and that's the importance you have to watch for. You have to make sure that if you fall into this habit, you break it. Because this substance, you don't want it to become your life. You want it to be an item that you can use to enhance something, not to live with.
The numbness dulls bad feelings, making it easy not to deal with them. But in life, you can only get over bad feelings if you actually feel them, and you have to process them to grow. Lastly, let's talk about physical withdrawal symptoms. The more you consume, the worse they'll be for you, especially if you use daily. Withdrawal can cause headaches and sweating or chills, decreased appetite, in severe cases even fever, nausea and abdominal pain. You might have trouble falling asleep, and if you do, you might have disturbing and vivid dreams. The withdrawal can put you in a depressive mood where life feels daft and pointless. You can feel restless, angry, anxious, or nervous. You may feel unable to do anything at all. After a few days, these symptoms will begin to subside, and after a few weeks, they'll be gone entirely. The exact time depends on how much and how long you've been consuming cannabis. Now, let's get to the worst part. Weed may damage your brain. This section was not fun to research because there's fierce debate among researchers how bad weed is for your brain and whether it has irreversible long-term consequences or not. There's no consensus yet, and it's hard to say anything definitive. Having said that, THC directly
Fuck, I love how honest this channel is. It's so respectful. It's so honest to be this straightforward. He's not putting his own views into it. It's just pure facts on the matter that it's this way or this way. And I love that. I love this channel for that. And because I respect this channel and how they make their videos, the last 5-6-ish minutes here, you're going to have to go watch on your own. You're going to go watch it on their video. And see how this ends. If you want to see the research on if or how badly weed can damage your brain, they have an amazing video on their channel that you should go watch. It will be linked in the description. But regardless, I was your host, Two-Face. This is a wonderful place, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your days. See you in the next video.